Hello and welcome to Jackson's Job. Today we're going to talk about hydration rate of dough and how it affects your bread making. When it comes to baking bread, types of bread is determined by how much water or liquid is within the ingredients. If you want a bagel or a pretzel, you want a very firm dough and you want a hydration rate of 50 to 57%. It'll give you a really nice dense and chewy crumb texture, which is perfect for those bagels. If you want a French bread or a sandwich style bread, you want to use a dough that is more standard and is easier to work with, 58 to 65%. It'll give you a nice tight crumb structure, which will hold up to those peanut butter and jelly sandwiches or those mile high BLTs. If you want a sweet roll or you want to start getting into sourdough, you want a soft and supple dough, so you want to go to the 65-70% mark. You'll get a more open crumb structure and it will be nice and light. I really prefer working with this dough when I make things like cinnamon rolls. If you want to go more artisan, get some ciabatta and maybe some more advanced sourdough where you get that really big, open, airy crumb structure, you want a hydration rate around the 70 to 90% mark. You'll get a very sticky and slack dough and it's very difficult to work with for a beginner. With the exception of the batter breads. We have the drop batter breads, which is usually typically 90% or more. Sometimes you'll see them in the low 80s, and this will give you an uneven but light texture. Think about muffins here. Then we've got the pourable batters. That's 100% or greater hydration rate. You'll have a very moist and tender dough. Think about quick breads and even those pancakes. Let's look at some various hydration rates of dough. First, we're going to do 50% hydration rate. We're going to use 50 grams of flour, 1 gram of instant dry yeast, and then 1 gram of salt. We're using instant yeast because you do not have to activate it ahead of time and you can just mix it in your dry ingredients. Next, we're going to add in 25 grams of water, which is 50% of the total amount of flour. When it comes to water, grams and milliliters are equal. We're going to say grams in this tutorial just to keep things simple. Notice how dry and crumbly this dough is, and it takes quite a while to gather up all those crumbs. This is called the pickup stage. As I'm kneading, I am just rolling it around all those bits of crumbs to pick up all the flour that didn't fully incorporate when I was mixing it with a spoon. And then I'm going to knead this for the next 10 minutes until I get a nice, supple, stretchy dough, and then we are going to put it aside to rise it. Look at how tight this dough is. It stretches really well and it doesn't tear when it's well kneaded, but it is perfect for those bagels and pretzels where you want a dense, chewy texture. And also they use this for Neapolitan pizzas in a wood burning stove because it drives out the moisture really fast and you get a really nice crust. Okay, now that that one is chilling, let's move on to the 60% hydration rate. We're going to use the exact same amount of flour. We're going to use 50 grams of flour, 1 gram of salt, and 1 gram of instant dry yeast. Mix it up again, and then we're going to add in 60% of the water. This time it's going to be 30 grams of water. It's already starting to come together a lot more easily than the 50% hydration rate. It tends to clump together, which is going to make this a lot easier to knead. I really like 60% for a lot of my bread recipes. I think it makes a really nice sandwich bread that you can really pile on your ingredients high. Now we are just going to knead this. It is not sticking to my hands. It's kind of tough to knead. I do have some pickup to do on the bench, but it's not quite as bad as the 50%. We're going to knead this again for 10 minutes to keep it consistent, and then we'll look at what it looks like in the end. It has now been 10 minutes and I want you to see how soft and elastic this dough is. It's much more supple and it stretches much easier before tearing. This is a wonderful dough to work with. It holds its shape really well and it makes excellent French bread. I absolutely love working with 60% hydration rate doughs. And I think you will too. And now we're going to move on to the 70% hydration rate. Again, we've got the same amount of ingredients, 50 grams of flour, 1 gram of salt, 1 gram of yeast. Now we're going to add in 70% of the water, which equals 35 grams or 35 milliliters. And then we're going to mix this up until it comes together. Notice how this is pulling away from the sides really cleanly and it's clumping onto my spoon really nicely. This is one of the best sticky doughs to work with. I really love the 70% hydration rate for cinnamon rolls and anything that you just want a really nice soft tender crumb in. Now you may find this is really sticky and sticks to your hands, so instead of trying to knead it, you may want to do the slap and fold method, which is exactly what it sounds like. You slap it on the counter and then you fold it over in half and you continue that process. In the end, you will get this really nice tacky dough that is super stretchable and seems like it can stretch forever. It's very slack, and if you roll it into a ball and let it rest, it will start to spread out. So you really need to work with this dough and have it confined into a space to keep its shape. Let's move on to 80% hydration rate. We're going to use the exact same amount of ingredients in the dry measurements: 50 grams of flour, 1 gram of salt, 1 gram of instant dry yeast. To find the 80% water, we're basically going to take 50 grams and times that by 0.8, and you end up with 40 grams of water, or 40 milliliters. And then we're going to stir this together. Now when you stir this together, it is very sticky and it wants to stick to the sides of the bowl and to your spoon, so you're going to have to scrape out the remaining ingredients to get all of your dough. And we are going to try to knead this, and if you try to knead this by the traditional method, it's going to stick to you completely, so you want to try the slap and fold, again, where you slap it down onto the counter and fold it over. In the end, it's going to always stay sticky and you're going to have to scrape off all that excess. Now, these are the type of doughs where having a stand mixer really comes into handy, because you're going to just make a sticky mess. It's workable, but you have to accept that your counter and your hands are going to be covered in dough at the end. Moving on to 90% hydration rate, we're using 50 grams of flour again, 1 gram of salt, and 1 gram of instant dry yeast. And then we are going to take 90% of the total flour content, which will end up being 45 grams, or again, 45 milliliters. And we're going to mix this with the back of a spoon. Now, if I tried to knead this, this would just be too hard to knead by hand. It's never going to work very well. So what I have found is these are the times you want to use a mixer, or what I do is just use the back of a wooden spoon or a plastic spoon like I'm doing here. To keep it consistent, I am going to mix this for the next 10 minutes by hand, and I am going to be completely exhausted, but I really want you to see what it looks like when the gluten develops. Look how stretchy it is and very fluid. It is perfect for baking right now. Notice how it's really hard to get out of the bowl and it's leaving behind a lot of residue. Now we're going to 100% hydration rate. We're going to use 50 grams of flour, 1 gram of yeast, and 1 gram of salt. Mix it together, and then we're going to add in 100% of the water content to flour, which 100 times 50 is, you guessed it, 50 grams or 50 milliliters. And since this is a very slack dough, we're going to do the same method as before, and we're going to knead it using the back of the spoon for the next 10 minutes. It actually pours out really nicely. This is why they call them pourable breads. Notice when I turn the pan, it's really fluid and it just slides all over the place. Here is the 50, here's the 60, the 70, the 80, the 90, and 100% hydration rates. Can you tell which one is going to work really well for a dinner roll versus a quick bread? Here we are a couple of hours later, and look at this. This one's keeping its shape quite well. This one has slacked off a little bit. This one has filled out the pan. And these down here, they're all just kind of loosely hanging out. And if I tip it up, they might break. So I'm going to leave them as they are. After these rise, they are going to be baked 450 degrees Fahrenheit, 230 degrees Celsius for about 20 minutes until they are golden brown like this. Now we are going to cut into the breads, and we're going to cut them down vertically and then horizontally so you really can see the crumb structure and see what they all look like. If you notice, the 50% hydration rate is really difficult to cut into, and using a cutting board that doesn't have a non-stick bottom is not helping. We're going to cut each one of these open the exact same way, and then we're just going to come back and look at them individually. Okay, we have these all cut open, and now we're going to look at them. Here is the 50% hydration rate. Look how tight that crumb is. If you push on it, it doesn't bounce back. It's a very dense loaf. They are amazingly chewy breads. Here's our 60%. You have a little bit more airy crumb texture. It's really nice and lofty. And if you press down on it, it starts to bounce back a little bit. It's much more softer than this 50%. Look at the difference in crumb structure alone. Isn't it just amazing how tight that crumb structure is in that 50% loaf? Next, we have our 70% loaf, and it's opened up even more. It's a very lovely texture. It bounces back really nice when you press down on it, and it's just a really nice bread to chew into. This is the 80%. Look how open that crumb structure is compared to the 50% hydration rate. It's nice and airy, and it will remind you of an English muffin. I really like this style of bread, and you can start making batter breads when you get to the stage, which is really easy for a beginner. Now the 90% has some more uneven open air pockets. You'll have some big holes and some little holes, and that is typical when you get into these really high hydration rates. Also, if you feel the bread, it feels damp when you press onto it, even though it is completely baked. Now, when we look at the 100% hydration rate compared to the other hydration rates, it's more airy than the 50%, but it's not as airy as, say, the 80 or 90%. And that's because the water starts to weigh down the bread. It is going to mold or mildew faster, whereas the 50% bread will go stale because the more moisture in a bread, the more likely it is to mold. Whichever hydration rate you choose ultimately decides what your bread is going to be in the end. If you want a bagel, you need to use the hydration rate that's lower. And to get these results, you have to start weighing out your dry ingredients. You're not going to ever get consistent results by doing a range of flour between 4 to 7 cups of flour. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I know it was on the long side, but I really wanted you to see visually the difference in breads. In the next coming weeks, we're going to extrapolate on this, and we are going to make some fun bread recipes. We're going to make some pretzels, we're going to make some batter bread, and everything in between. Thank you for watching, and as always, happy baking.